Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. Here you can grow your knowledge about marketing operations, listen to ideas and strategies to help you scale, grow, and optimize your efficiency, drive your speed to market, and enrich your work life. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Art of Marketing Operations, a Taylor podcast. I'm Glenn Bottomley, and today my guest is Cate Hollowitsch, Chief Marketing Officer at Nesnah Ventures, a family-owned private equity firm with a long-term focus and a diverse array of businesses across multiple market sectors. Thanks for joining us today, Cate.
Hi, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, you can hear it in your voice. You are passionate. You are a passionate person. I love that. But one of the things that I know that you really find interesting is this discussion around fear and how fear can actually hold people back in work, not just marketing operations, but all across the board. So can you share how this sort of shows up, in the day-to-day life of a marketing operations expert? And why is fear such an issue?
Well, actually, I would consider myself an expert on many marketing topics, and I'm afraid right at the moment doing this. So that's a great example of how it shows up day to day. I'm sure you were afraid the first time you did this too. The very first interview you did in the very first podcast the first episode. But for all of us regular humans in the world, fear is just an everyday thing. Many of us have probably been afraid before we hit all on the send email on a company-wide announcement, or even just a marketing activity out in the world. Is the price right? Is there a typo in there that I didn't see? All of those things are moments when fear shows up. So you can't even think then about how do you bring your crazy idea to your boss. So from the smallest things of just my day-to-day activity, am I doing it right? To the big things of, I have a game-changing idea and I'm scared to go tell somebody. So I think there's a huge spectrum of fear for everybody at work, especially marketing people, because we're supposed to be cutting edge. We're supposed to be out there on the edge of it and doing all the fun stuff and coming up with all the new ideas, and all the new campaigns and the clever advertisements. And if we can't, somebody at some point had to get over their fear in order to put those ideas out there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and so how do you think that fear sabotages someone from basically being sort of the best they can be? What is it that it does?
Well, you start to get all the side emotions around fear. So fear is just one of them, but you start to get anxious and stressed out and worried and nervous and all of the little tiny emotions. Doubt, you start to doubt yourself and you start to doubt all the people around you. You can start to mistrust people around you out of fear that something isn't right and it wasn't anything you could control. What if the guy downstream did something wrong or the girl upstream did something wrong, but it's landing on me today? And so we sabotage ourselves because we start to listen to all that can't language and we start to listen to all those things in our daily life that cause all those problems, and we step back. Often we step back, but much like the rest of the animal kingdom, we will freeze, fly, or fight. And so none of those you want to happen in the workplace, right? Freezes, nobody does anything. And you either don't go share your big idea, or you miss a deadline because you didn't get that email out on time, or you fly, you just decide, I don't want to be on that big project because it's too scary. I don't want to be included in something that might fail, or God forbid you fight. So then you decide, I'm taking them out before they can take me out. And we definitely don't want that at work. So it sabotages us in all sorts of ways. I think self-preservation is probably the most obvious way, but I think people don't realize when they're doing it. So that it's more in that fight spectrum where people start assuming that something bad is going to happen. They're wanting to hold on to all the things that they hold dear, their office, their title, the promotion that they think is due to them, their bonus at the end of the year. And so we start making strange choices in our day-to-day life at work in order to self-preserve those things that we don't want to lose. But then those are the very reasons why you end up losing them anyway, because all your coworkers, you start doing the behaviors that create the thing you're trying to prevent. So maybe you slow down your communications or stop altogether. you start mistrusting people. And so you're not including them in communications when they need it, or passing information along that maybe normally you would have. You're so busy worrying about what everybody around you is doing. You're not focusing on your task and your role to play in that process. And ultimately you end up bringing the very thing upon your head that you were hoping never happened.
Yeah, it becomes self-fulfilling at that point. I think I shared this story with you when we met before, that I used to work with a chief operating officer at a company I used to work at. And I remember asking this individual what was sort of the key to their success. And one of the things that they said was, to them, it was the most important thing is to live very simply, in a very minimalist sort of way. They lived in a relatively small home. They didn't really have a lot of extravagances. They had one small boat because they love to go fishing as a couple. And they said, because their fear, or the reason why they always saw other issues, was that people, to your point about self-preservation, they needed to preserve the bonus, they needed to preserve a title, they needed to preserve their position in the organization, all the things that they had acquired, the debt that they had, acquired upon themselves. And so fear becomes a very, very motivating factor, as opposed to making decisions that are the right decisions for the organization. And so I think, to your point, I think fear, used the wrong way, it can be a good motivator, but at the same time, it can also incentivize someone to make bad choices because they're not making the choices for the company. They're actually making choices for self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And actually, I took a path on minimalism a number of years ago when we had to kind of legacy clean from my father, who had passed away. And I realized how much time we were spending just sorting papers and pennies and shoes and all the things. And it started me thinking about, well, what about my office? I mean, you and I are maybe of an age where we had paper at one point. We actually did a lot of our work on paper. Financials came out in a big binder at the end of the month, not in an email. And all of that accumulates. And not only does it cause clutter in the mind, but to your point, it helped me think about how I could downsize all the things around me. So we went from a 5,000 square foot house to 900 square feet. And we got rid of all the debt, and we got rid of all the big thing, and we got rid of all the stuff I was chasing. And it wasn't my intention for that to be a benefit at work. My intention was to just slim down the clutter and my lifestyle so that my children wouldn't have to clean all that up after me. But what I discovered was the same thing your friend discovered, that I actually started making better decisions at work, because it wasn't about me, and it wasn't about me getting a bonus or me getting my raise at the end of the year, me hitting a performance measure of some sort, and at all costs. So it removed that at all costs perspective from the choices that I was making. And it became something that even from my marketing budget, we try to do. So we try very hard to keep our entire marketing plan to one page. And we have 8 portfolio companies, and they all have a one-page marketing plan, because it keeps us very on track, and it helped us eliminate the fluff and eliminate the things that aren't really driving to revenue or any of our other KPIs. And so this concept of simple living can definitely be applied in the office. And honestly, it can make your team a lot more sane as well.
Well, and to your point too, minimalism, simple living, this focus, I'm very much like you as well. And that focus, again, it's not about eschewing the things that don't matter. It's not about just throwing away everything that you don't want or whatever. It's really about surrounding yourselves with the things that bring you value. And that's in a personal environment. But to your point, it naturally stems over into the workplace, because it is also saying, what can I surround myself with? What tools, what processes, what technologies are actually bringing value to this business? And so I think that there's a definite parallel there. So I love your analogy there. So can you then let's talk a bit more about fear then with marketing operations. Then can you give an example of when fear or how fear can actually hold marketing operations executives back from being effective in their role?
Yeah, well, I feel bad for marketing operations executives because they're so dependent on the rest of us marketing people. The brand people have to have their act together, and the communications people have to have their act together. The digital marketing people have to. Everyone's got to, because they're the crux in the middle, and a lot of the daily work flows downhill to them and their teams, and they're dependent on the rest of us around them doing it right and doing our part. And so I feel like the marketing ops group in particular has to have a lot more trust than the rest of us. They have to have more psychological safety, because they really, if something gets screwed up by the time it gets to them, it's probably because an input was off. So some input to their world was probably off before it even got into their world to deal with it. And so I think marketing executives, I think for them, the fear, and I've never been an actual marketing operations executive, I've been in all the other parts of it. But I would imagine that fear and sabotage for them is really because they're defending themselves and they're defending their people. That concept of self-preservation, they get stuck explaining things that maybe didn't have anything to do with them. And so they also have more work to do because they have to do more olive branch holding. They have to go outward and make more relationships and build better networks and get ahead of it and figure out the communications before it comes to them and get themselves into the right meetings and make the right network and really get involved in projects earlier so that they can help ward off what could be a downfall later in the system that people aren't aware of. And so I think those marketing operations have a little bit tougher job than the rest of us.
Well, and I think to your point, I'd be interested in your point of view on this, is that almost feels like a way for marketing operations leaders and team members to sort of share the fear, quote unquote, because they, in and of themselves, marketing operations team members, there are so many demands placed on marketing operations team members today. And so if there is a way to build connections, build relationships, whether it's through, a sales organization, an executive organization, a brand, and then within marketing, a brand organization, a research organization, a digital marketing organization, all of those elements, however your organization is structured, I think that by building those relationships, it allows the team to be more effective, but also be more comfortable in taking risks, because those relationships are there, that more and more people in the organization understand why we're taking this risk, why we're doing what we're doing. Would you agree with that or disagree?
I agree. And I actually think this is, back to just regular humans on earth. In any relationship, especially ones that are heavily dependent on trust, it takes two to make it work and it takes two to make it fail. So it's never just, they didn't invite me to that meeting or that person didn't send me that email. It takes both sides. And sometimes that's hard for people to realize that this is being done unto me, but I have a role to play in preventing it or fixing it or writing it for the next time or improving it down the road. And so if everyone is looking at it from that perspective of it, no matter where you are in that process, in all of those networks and organizations within each person's company that you talked about, you have to go figure out who are the people, who are your allies, who can be your network, who can keep you in the loop about certain meetings, who can invite you to certain meetings, who can you invite, who can you return the favor for. So the more that we're both sides, all sides are working together and looking out for the other people in the mix and understanding how that communication flow goes, the better for everybody. But I would challenge people to not look at it like it's the other person's fault, because it usually isn't always. And everybody has a role to play in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the phrases that I use with my team a lot is that everybody wants their fingerprints on success. But I really like your point of view of that it takes two people to make it work, but it also takes two people to make it fail. Because there is a shared responsibility of making sure that a business initiative is successful. So, but let's delve in a bit on decision making then, because where my mind goes now is, so when it comes to decision making in marketing operations, there could be, and naturally probably would be, a fear in, say, making the wrong choice. So is there a way to then put fear aside? What's your recommendation on how a marketing operations team should set fear aside and just take the leap anyways.
It's all about calculated risk. So I think there's going to be, whenever you're the one holding the bucket on any decision, whether it's what to have for dinner, or if I'm going to spend $100,000 on that software or this software, there's a little bit of concern of, and buyer's remorse often sets in the day after you push the button, right? So everybody gets a little bit like, oh, maybe I didn't make the right choice. And then if anybody has baggage over, well, this one time I did make the bad choice, and now they're carrying that with them into all their future choices, it's a lot of hurdles to get over. And so for me, it's all about calculated risk. And so one of the things I try to do with a lot of my team is say, let's write down the list of everything that's holding you back. I don't care about the things that you know are going to work and the things that are pushing you forward. Make a list of everything that would be a reason to not take this chance, to not make this decision. And then one by one, cross off the ones that are an actual risk. Because they may just have a fear of, my boss doesn't like that software. But that may not be true. That may be a weird tribal story that came out at a water cooler 2 years ago. So by writing all the things down and then identifying which ones are actual reasons to hold back on a decision versus ones that are not, now you're left with a smaller bucket. And if we can eliminate the risk altogether, then looking at the ones that are left, it's just a matter of understanding what is the degree of severity of the risk of the things that are left. Is any of it going to take the entire company down? Or are they just, somebody may not like it and I might get yelled at tomorrow? Whatever the worst thing is you can possibly imagine, just imagine it and get it out of your system. But often what I find with doing that with my team is the fear that they've generated in their own head about the process of making the decision it's not really there. And forcing them to kind of go through this process really, really helps. But it's calculated risk because you're never going to remove every tiny thing that could ever go wrong.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you, from when you're evaluating and calculating that risk to a decision, do you bring in your own experiences of minimalism into that as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, we were just thinking about changing to a very well-known CRM, and 4 or 5 times the cost of the one we were currently using. And the one we were currently using integrated into all of our other systems, but it required us to have 5 or 6 other little things to make all the connection point work. And by going with the more expensive one, there was a whole bunch of other reasons why we did it. But one of them also was that it allowed us to get rid of a whole bunch of other software that we didn't need anymore. We were also paying for a bunch of software to just make those connections to the other thing. So the minimalism also allowed us to slim down and because we have a whole IT department that has to manage all that stuff. And so we're actually taking work off other teams' plates as well by looking at it from a minimalistic, and that actually put a check mark in the pro column of, yes, it's more expensive, but that's also eliminating security risks. The less software out there that has our information, the better. So there was a lot of unseen, hard to quantify benefits to minimizing wherever you can in whatever the decision is.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very insightful comment about, I think a lot of times people think about minimalism or essentialism, depending on, your point of view, but people look at that as it could be perceived as self-serving. Now, in a personal context, I can understand that, but bringing that into a workplace, yes, that's simplifying, focusing on the most important, the essential work that you need to get done. But this point that you just made is really important because not only does that help a marketing operations team, but every one of those other relationships that we talked about that marketing operations team is building in the organization, that simplification, that focus on minimalism is going to then simplify those relationships and any of the downstream work that those remote teams or disparate teams employ to support your marketing operations team. It makes their lives simpler, better, faster, more essential. That's just a really interesting point that you raised.
And it builds trust because now you have other departments looking at it like, wow, they aren't just in it for themselves and doing whatever makes their lives easier. And you're also working on that brand, that 2 to make it work, 2 to make it fail. When you're actually doing something for the benefit of another department that you could take or leave, why wouldn't you err on the side of helping boost those relationships with other departments as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to your point that when they see their lives, their work lives getting stronger, better, easier, more efficient, more effective, that trust is just naturally going to emerge because of the built relationship and that equity that has been built between the marketing operations teams and their individual teams. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. So how do you think then that companies should use this idea of minimalism in work? Specifically now, I'd like to focus on like the physical manifestation of their brand. So think about, you've got all of the physical touch points of their brand, whether it's a trade show booth, direct mail, marketing collateral, any sort of touch point that a customer or consumer is then physically interacting with the brand, as well as the digital touch points where the customer is interacting, whether it be a digital ad, the website, a blog, social media, etc. How do you feel that minimalism should be brought into those sort of two worlds?
That's such a good question. And at first I kind of struggled with how to answer that because there's just so many of those physical manifestations. I mean, so many of them. But then I pulled out my one-page marketing plan and I looked at it and I thought, well, how would I answer it through the lens of my own actual day-to-day work? And the reality is there's nothing on my one-page marketing plan that doesn't also have a cohesive physical manifestation. So the whole point of the brand, one of the most important things that I'm so passionate about is the brand is everything. The brand drives all the other stuff. It drives how HR talks in the recruiting world. It drives how our business development team is talking to small business owners that may want to get bought by us. It's how we're talking at Chamber of Commerce dinners, let alone how we're talking to consumers with social media or trade show booths or sales material. And as I was going through that question in my mind and thinking about it in terms of my own work, one does not beget the other. So the minimalism in our activity, in our strategy, in our tactics, just naturally meant that it forced us to focus on the manifestation, the physical manifestation of the brand. And so often the squirrels and the add-ons of the physical manifestation are because you have too many tactics and too many strategies and too many squirrels you're chasing in the other part of it. And the manifestation of the brand is the one that has to carry the heavy load. But by slimming down the work to be done in the first place, it left us with only one choice for the physical manifestations. And so we've also, with 7, 8 portfolio companies, that does make it a little difficult to keep things cohesive. But we have found our operations team is just so amazing. They have found things that allow us to be nimble and agile. So they have found trade show booth setups where we just take off one piece of fabric and put on a different piece of fabric so that we can switch easier. We have navigated through more like website templates. So customers of one of our portfolio companies will never, ever, ever buy from one of the other portfolio companies. So they can have the exact same website template. And the content and everything else swaps out and even if people did see it and knew that it was connected, so what? I mean, to what end? And so we found a lot of ways to simplify our work like that. And so we run these marketing departments for these portfolio companies with 5 people. There's 5 people on my team, and we have 7 portfolio companies that we're doing all of that marketing activation for. But it's because we found ways to minimize the physical manifestations and template it, if you will, use things that can go back and forth across all of them, but still allow us to keep the identities and the tone of voice and the archetypes of all of the brands unique and special, and use it in all of the actual activities and tactics.
I love that. It is, back to your point, it's a simplification, and it's how do you scale. Embedded in everything you just said there is that power of how am I going to become most efficient here so that I can scale this operation. So today it's 7, tomorrow it's 8, the next day it's 10, the next day it's 12. And how can you just be as efficient as possible, both with physical as well as digital? So your examples are really, really well said. And that it sort of brings kind of another topic kind of come to mind, because when we chatted before, there was something that you said that I wanted to come back to, and this could be a good segue to it. And you were talking about how it is really, really important to figure out for particularly a marketing operations team is what is not working or proving what isn't working. As just as important it is to show what is working. So can you talk about that a little bit more about why is it sometimes so important to identify what doesn't work?
Oh, I love this. So I try to explain this to people, and sometimes I get blank stares because it's a little bit of reverse psychology. It's a little bit of ethical bribery. It's a little bit of double negative. When you throw all that into the mix, people are like, what? What did you just say? So and back to the fear, because it brings the fear into play. And so we have an innovation team here at our organization. We really struggle with people putting like the big idea on the table. We get a lot of little things that would just make their day-to-day life easier. It's like, yeah, well, we can do that. That's easy. But we don't often get this kind of like wowing us idea because people are afraid. They may have gotten shot down about that at another company, or maybe their coworker across the cube laughed at them when they said it. Who knows? But people just kind of are afraid. Plus, many of our owners are involved at that level too. And so, people are just afraid of them because that's what people do. Nicest people, and there's no reason to be afraid. And they'll talk to them and eat lunch with them. But when it comes to saying, I have a crazy idea, people just don't want to put it on the table. And so I decided to look at it more from the lens of, give me the thing that you think we will never pull off. Tell me what you think we can't do. And my job is I'm going to prove that we can't do it. And so there's a lot of different benefits to this. One small benefit is that if in fact you get to the point where you could actually do it, you have crossed all the hurdles to get there. Often in regular innovation teams, when you say, this is a cool idea, let's go bring it to life, you're running so fast to bring it to life that sometimes when you get there, there's other hurdles that came up that nobody thought of. But if your whole purpose is to prove that it's going to fail, you're going to find all of those things along the way. And so then by the time you get to the end and you're ready to bring it to life, you've basically thought of everything. Maybe a handful of things have slid through the filter that you've missed, but the vast majority of the big things, because you're going to go for the big dogs, you're going to look immediately for all the big reasons why that thing isn't going to work and what's going to drag it down and why we shouldn't put money into it. And so you're going to get over the big hurdles of the concerns of doing whatever the cool innovation thing is. But then also you've removed all that fear. So then when you go and you put a bunch of people to work on this project, they don't have that pressure of what if I have to make a decision to say this is going to be the next big thing and it's going to double the revenue of our company and I'm wrong and it doesn't. You've removed all of that from them as well, because their only job in life is to shoot that idea down, get rid of it, kill it, make sure it doesn't work, find every reason to hold us back. And they go at it with more joy and excitement because it's actually kind of fun. It's like playing a video game of, like chopping up all the fruit and, you're trying to hit all the things that are coming at you and get it out of your way. So it's another way to kind of gamify the work for people and make it a lot easier to handle. And so we've tried to take this into all sorts of other ideas, even just small. When we're doing our strategy planning for the year, my team, we look at all the tactics we want to do. And one of the things we try to do is like, okay, tell me why that one won't work. Spend another day and come back to me at the end of tomorrow and tell me all the reasons why that idea you gave me won't work. And we get to talk through it. And we've put all the risk on the table and thought of all the hurdles before we actually commit to a pop-up store or some other crazy thing we want to come up with. So
I love the introduction of Fruit Ninja.
Yes, that's what it is.
As a part of the analogy. I think that is great. That is the first time
so
on the
old
podcast.
School, yeah.
It's awesome. I love that. Well, and I may have mentioned this to you when we chatted before, but one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs, former CEO of Apple before he passed away. He said he is just as proud of the products and services that they never launched and that they decided to never launch as he is about the products and services that they did launch, because they made the right decision. It wasn't either the right one for the market. They weren't growing at it the right way. They weren't planning to market it the right way, whatever it is. So, and we will never know how many products and services they chose to never launch. But I think that that's a really, a good way of looking at failure and about, why something would fail and why looking at it in that lens can be a very powerful technique.
Well, yeah. And what if it was my idea And my team is sitting out there knowing that something isn't going to work. And they're like, are you going to tell her? I'm not telling her. Who's telling her? So when I just say, okay, I have this crazy idea. Can somebody take the task to prove to me why this won't work? I'll do it. They're like jumping over themselves to do it because I've already admitted it's not going to work. I've already said this isn't going to work and I need one of you to show me how it's not going to work. Occasionally they come back and they're like, oh, we can't find a reason. And then I say, well, what do you think? Should we do it then? And now suddenly we have buy-in and we're in it together and we're moving versus, what if they were too afraid to tell me and then it fails and we all look like not experts in our field. That wouldn't be awesome. So
yeah, not ninjas.
Right, not ninjas, no.
So Cate, before we wrap up today's episode then, what is the main takeaway that you want to share to help understand the challenges facing marketing operations executives today?
I think the main takeaway is the best thing to do is find another human. So all of us, even Gallup says that having a friend at work is one of the best signs of engagement. But I think even from the concept of fear and innovation, all the things you and I talked about, Glenn, you have to have somebody at work that can be your pal, your friend, that will tell you what you want to hear and tell you what you need to hear. And all of those things help with the fear. They help with the trust. They help with building those networks with other departments. They help with the psychological safety. Having that person at work that you can bounce things off of and go into battle with is going to make everybody's job a lot easier and you'll be happier too. So I really think, even though I would like to encourage everyone to go on a minimalist path, I actually think the first step is just find another human to connect with and share the journey, share the load a little.
There we go. Well, we'll leave it there. Cate, thank you so much. This wraps up this episode of The Art of Marketing Operations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cate.
Thanks for having me, Glenn.
Well, until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Marketing Operations, brought to you by Taylor. Don't forget to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast player. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and share. Until next time.